Should 16-year-olds have the right to vote? Some say yes. Northampton City Council has passed a resolution in favor of lowering the voting age to 16 for municipal elections. The city's Charter Review Commission is currently looking at that and other proposals. Carolee McGrath sat down with City Council member Bill Dwight and Margot Shocket-Green, a senior at Northampton High School and the chair of the Mayor's Youth Commission, to find out more.
It's interesting. I mean, the Mayor's Youth Commission actually has been discussing this now for close to almost 6 years, has been discussing about the possibility of having 16-year-olds vote. Originally, it was just kind of floated as kind of this absurdist idea. And then as issues became more urgent, I mean, I think globally, locally, nationally, there was a genuine interest in the prospect of lowering the voting age to 16, some frustration with the fact that they didn't have the ability to vote.
And when you say issues became more urgent, urgent for who and which issues?
Well, you know, the most striking one, of course, came out after the various school shootings and reactions to that. But there was also the election of Donald Trump tended to prompt a lot of concerns and discussions, particularly in Northampton being a progressive community. And the youth commissioners and other youth were speaking outwardly about their concerns and organizing and working to try and affect change, but at the same time, not really sure how they would go about it. And they were disempowered, they were disenfranchised. They didn't have the means to, they could march, but at the same time, they didn't have the opportunity to vote for the people who might actually make a difference for them.
Right, and that's, a lot of people would say, you know what, that's life. There have been generations in the past that have been 16 years old and been so frustrated that they just can't do anything, but you just had to get to that age of 18 when you can also join the military as well, you know, to have that right. And I would say a lot of people would argue that it's a privilege to be able to vote and to exercise that right. So why not wait?
Well, I think oddly enough, it's not a privilege, it's a right. It actually shouldn't be a privilege. It actually, driving is a privilege, which we allow at 16 years old. That is a privilege. We don't expect you to drive, but people do want to drive, and you have to take a test and get a license and get approved by the state and so on, but that is a privilege. That's what my driving teacher told me, but voting is not a privilege. Voting is actually a fundamental aspect of being a citizen in the community. And as such, we historically, when we're watching voting trends and voter participation plummeting and dropping over the decade, from each succeeding decade. And the fact that there are people under the age of 18 who are interested in being involved and want to be engaged and not being allowed to, I think we're squandering an opportunity to get that type of civic engagement. It really is kind of fundamental to the way we function on the planet, is to enfranchise as many people as possible who can participate in their own governance.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what happened in Northampton and how you became involved.
Yeah, so I joined the Mayor's Youth Commission in my sophomore year of high school, and during that year, the discussion was already starting about how we would go about petitioning the state for the right to lower the voting age to 16. And one of our members, who now works with me, drafted a resolution. And in my junior year of high school, when I became the chair of the Youth Commission, we, with the help of Bill, finished drafting this resolution and started the process of running it by the City Council, which was a great process to go through. Everyone was very supportive. This was right after the March for Our Lives, and so people were really in tune to what the youth had to say. And it was a really important time for us because these issues were feeling more and more critical, and it was really important for me to try to push this idea of youth civic engagement.
Okay, so it passed the City Council, and really the next step is to petition the state, and that's where you're at.
Right. Well, right now we're undergoing a charter review, which is our equivalent of a city constitution, if you will, and There are going to be some changes proposed, and you have to petition the legislature for permission. And we're talking about lowering the voting age, not throughout the state, although I think that would be ideal, but we're talking about just for Northampton municipal elections and 16, 17-year-olds being able to participate in that.
But long term, would you want to change it to something different? Because when you're talking about affecting change and you're talking about, I'm assuming, gun control and some of the other issues that are really important to you, municipal elections are important, but then you would really think about, state elections, right? And national elections as some of those, I guess, platforms where you really would have a voice. Is that something that long term you'd want to move beyond the city?
I think, yeah, I mean, as I said, because voter participation is dropping, earlier engagement would hopefully hold on to voters. I mean, I guess it's been shown that once you start voting, you don't stop. I suppose it's an addiction of sorts. But the fact is that people don't become disengaged. So the more engagement, and at 16, I think Northampton, if they allowed 16 and 17-year-old votes, you'll have a more sophisticated electorate and with a broader sense of the issues. We talk about them without them. I mean, it's interesting, in my age, I mean, the one thing that we all know is that we were all teenagers at one point, or we were that age at one point. I don't know what it's like to be African American, really. I don't know what it's like to be a woman, really. But I do know what it was like to be a teenager. And I think that we tend to forget that. And the issues, they're not removed from the issues, they're affected by the issues, and they want to participate. I hope that something like this catches on nationally.
But so are younger people. I mean, there's plenty of kids who are 14 who want to be engaged and who care passionately about issues that might have nothing to do with gun control. It could be the environment, right. It could be, religious freedom, something else, who are also really smart and probably very qualified as far as making decisions. But at what point do you set that limit to say, okay, you're old enough to vote?
Well, so at 16, you gain a lot of responsibilities. You are able to drive, which is incredibly dangerous. You have the responsibility, you are able to consent. You are able to be held accountable as an adult in court. And among all of these things, you are treated like an adult in some cases, and in others you are not. And so from the age of 16 to 18, it's a very frustrating time where you are expected to act like an adult, but you do not have the privilege or responsibility to vote and to actually have your voice heard as an adult. You are still considered a child in the eyes of the candidates who are supposed to be representing us.
Would you want to lower the age for people to join the military? People have raised that argument. Would that be something that would also make you feel adult?
Well, it's interesting. That's a throwback to, because during the Vietnam War, of course, the voting age was 21. The reason it was lowered to 18 was because people were being drafted, sent to war, and completing their tour, or either being killed and having absolutely no say, no agency in the decisions. There's nothing that's quite the equivalent to that, but the fact is that we make these arbitrary stopping points and these age designations, and when you start to think about qualifications for you and me to vote, for instance, we don't have to be taxpayers. We don't have to be smart. We don't have to be good looking. I mean, I'm referring to myself in all these cases, by the way, just so you know. But I mean, we don't. These are not criteria for qualification for voting. And in fact, actually, you could be a reprehensible person with the worst intentions and still qualify to vote and be enfranchised. So the fact is that we struggle to try and find the perfect age and the cutoff point, as you say. But the thing is I say, expand it to the point where it's sustainable. 16 is sustainable. I mean, if 14 at some point appears to be a good time, fine. We're not the ones we didn't make this up. We're not inventing this. This actually happened in a number of other communities and countries that allow 16-year-olds to vote. And it has the intrinsic value of engaging people in manifesting their own governance and manifesting their own control.